I think somebody who's outside of the out of the GTA, who wants to talk about transit, I don't think they should be touting Buck of beer.
No,
They shouldn't be touting Buck of beer either.
Well, that was the last election. The other party, Buck of beer. Now, I'd like to see
they shouldn't be doing
Buck
of ride. They should be doing. We will invest in
exactly. But
in
if
actually
we saw a
building a
coalition
network
between the Buck of ride and the Buck of beer parties, it could be a fun ride.
You could have a beer bus, a party bus. Absolutely.
Welcome to Hitting Home with Mike and Arif, and two topics that come up here quite a bit: housing, transportation. They're intertwined. We're seeing a lot of talk during this election year about both topics. And what do you think? Do you think that the transportation issue is something that can be resolved, or that we're...
Well, I was going to say, I think it's a good thing that housing is a topic on top of people's minds. Otherwise, we really wouldn't have a purpose of being here.
Well, that's it.
Yeah, but in any type of market and in any type of an economy, housing is and will continue to be at the forefront of people's minds. And certainly for as long as there is a disparity between average household income or average individual income and the increase in housing prices or the shortage of housing availability, I think that's always going to be on people's minds, regardless of whether we're in a strong economy or a challenged economy. As for transportation, I think you're absolutely right. It does go hand in hand. You know, we've said it as recent as a couple of weeks ago, I'm guessing on the show, it would really be fantastic if not only our local municipality, but municipalities in North America in general would be proactive in their efforts to build the infrastructure. And the infrastructure can be, Mike, in terms of transportation, it might be roads networks, it could be public transit infrastructure, it also could be that alternative mode of transportation, whether it's walking paths, biking paths, that kind of thing. So I definitely think it is on the top of people's minds, certainly as we continue to see migration out of larger urban centers where people are now saying, I can look at me, I can work with a modem and a laptop anywhere.
There's that. And also I can no longer afford to live within that big metropolis. And there's two types of transit, I guess you could break it down. There is that intercity, you know, your subways, your buses going from point A to point B to work and that. But then there's also the intermodal transport between municipalities. Barrie to Toronto, the GO train. You know, GO train runs north, it runs east and west of Toronto. There's all that point A to point B traffic. But we are still a autocentric, if that's even a term, society. We love our cars. We love the ease and convenience, not to mention the speed that you can get from point A to point B with a car versus taking the train that stops for 10 minutes, 15 minutes at each stop all the way through. And our transport system, our rail system in North America, especially here in Ontario, is...
Let's call it garbage, Mike. That's what it is. It's behind.
It hasn't advanced any further than it was right after World War II.
There are countries and cities that were built thousands and thousands of years ago where they still managed to bore under those cities and build networks. You can look at Russia, you can look at Rome, you can look at London, England.
No, I know.
You can look at anywhere around the world. There has to be a will. And where there's a will, it gets done.
And
it gets done. Mike, I'm going to tell you this though as well is the biggest challenge that I see, since we're talking about this topic, is when the election cycle is over, will the politicians actually follow through?
Yeah. Well, that's always the question.
Or do they count on the electorate to have a short-term memory? Or do they count on saying, well, we didn't know what shape the books were in, and therefore, you know what I mean? Like it's
and in that 4-year cycle, as soon as those elections are done, you're already thinking ahead to, am I going to get reelected? And in order to do that, I should make some effort to keep those books in line. If you're pouring multi-billions of dollars into a new electrical high-speed rail system in southern Ontario, you're going to appeal to some, but you're also going to be running up that deficit quite a bit. And that's the fear, I think, with a lot of politicians, is they
Yeah.
want to play safe. But you know what? The long-term cost is always going to be higher.
So there's a benefit. If you look at a city, I mean, I had the pleasure and the opportunity to be in New York recently, as you know, and now there is a major metropolitan area. It is densely populated. However, in fairness, actually Manhattan is seeing a number of the trends that we're seeing, certainly in Toronto, people being able to work from home. There's plenty of office space that is now vacant. Entire buildings that are vacant. There are also residential complexes that are vacant because there are people who are saying, well, I'm going to keep my job, but I now no longer need to commute into work.
Yeah,
I now no longer need to be in walking distance from work. I can live outside of the Manhattan, that borough, and I can go into Queens or Brooklyn or other areas outside the borough, which are a fraction of the cost of living in Manhattan.
Some of the highest priced commercial real estate on the planet is in Manhattan, as well as real estate.
Real estate in
like
general.
Residential.
Yeah, I mean, you're getting, you know, a tiny bachelor pad, or what do they call it, junior, for about $2,000 a month. Where I wanted to go with this, though, Mike, is when you have invested over decades, when you've invested as a municipality and a local government in a strong and robust public transportation network. We're talking buses, we're talking trains with multiple lines.
Oh yeah.
Multiple
Subway
lines, above ground, below ground, subway, numerous tiers below. Same thing as London, England, numerous tiers that, I don't know how many.
decades ahead of us.
Does England have about 30 different lines, 15 different lines? I don't know what it is, but more than 2, let's put it that way. So you can then encourage your population to use transit. Now, there's a battle going on here in the province, and there are those who wish for a highway, an additional toll or non-toll highway to ease the gridlock, and there are those who don't want it. And the ones who are living in the major urban centers are saying, how greedy could you be wanting a highway? It's negative on carbon. And
well, we've seen that. That's been the test. So it is the 413 that they want to run east-west
Bradford
to
area.
take some of the pressure off the 401 and 407.
And then you've got everybody who
Nobody wants
doesn't
it.
live in that metropolitan area saying, yeah, it's nice you got subway, but we don't have transit out here. But until such time...
Go further north, it's even worse.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But until such time as we build a transportation network that actually serves the people, you can't get the people off the road.
No.
And I'm not talking about, you know, somebody with a van, a pickup truck, a ladder, a full toolkit, where they have to do their job.
Well, obviously.
They can't use public transit. So
The person with their laptop that they can put under their arm, make their way to their office, do some of their work on their way. I'd love to be able, if my job was a point A to point B every day, I'd be fully in favor of riding transit. I'd be listening to my podcast, reading, doing whatever on the way there and back.
When it takes an hour and a half to go 15 minutes worth of distance in a car or in an Uber or in a taxi, you know, how do you justify that? And
an hour and a half to go 15 minutes?
On surface route transit in our city or in another city or in another area. Or if it takes, you know, 2.5 hours to take a GO bus or a GO train from Barrie down to Toronto versus
You're an hour
45
and a half
minutes.
to an hour and 15 minutes on a good day from here to Union Station, Barrie to Union Station, by car.
Yes.
Yeah.
And double that in transit.
Double it for transit, for sure.
And the question becomes, are people putting a value on their time? You know, and you can't just say to somebody, well, I guess you don't care about the environment. Well, no, I do care about the environment. And at the same time, I can't justify a 6-hour journey.
Yeah, well, not everybody can. Some people, though, have no choice. They're not in a position to purchase a car, maintain a car, pay for insurance and upkeep on a vehicle.
Absolutely.
They have to do it. And
there's a disparity is my point, though. There's a disparity in the sense that if government truly wants to serve the people and they truly want a greener environment and they truly want to take the pressure off the roads networks, then we can't continue to stall decade after decade after decade on the investment.
We're always going to need a balance of both. We're going to need our road network, and there'll always be those who choose to drive their own personal automobiles wherever they go. And some people just, their work day is set up as such that they need that because they're not going to be taking taxis from one town to another. If you travel for
We have an aging society.
Job,
if you're a PSW and you've got to go from client to client to client to client, you can't do it on transit.
You're not going to do it. No, because the efficiency will not be there. You could do it, but it's going to take you 2 weeks to do what you could do otherwise do by
in a couple days.
In a couple days, yeah.
Absolutely.
So that's a reality. And I know that one of the parties is is putting this Buck a Ride. It's a cute, catchy slogan and campaign. But it's not going to appeal to those who can afford to drive and who have their vehicle and want to drive their vehicle. It'll be good for those who are already using transit, but I don't think it's going to shift people over to suddenly riding the
If you've got any candidates outside of a major metropolitan area that has a healthy transit system or a relatively healthy transit system who's promoting a Buck a Ride, you're not speaking to your electorate.
No. No.
So I think somebody who's outside of the out of the GTA, who wants to talk about transit, I don't think they should be touting Buck a beer.
No,
they shouldn't be touting Buck a beer either.
Well, that was the last election. Either party Buck a beer. Now I'd like to see
they shouldn't be doing
there.
Buck a Ride. They should be doing. We will invest in
exactly. But
in
if
actually
there's a
building a
coalition
network
between the Buck a Ride and the Buck a beer parties, it could be a fun ride.
You could have a beer bus, a party bus. Absolutely. Yeah, sure.
I don't think those two are coming together on that, but no, and there'll always be that need. And let's go back to talking about the roads. Okay, highways is one solution. Build more highways, make it more efficient to move people, relieve congestion. Well, there's the example, 413, the highway they want to put through. There's a lot of resistance to that, and the closer you get geographically to it, the higher the resistance level. But it's also a $25 to $30 billion project to build that. And as we know, projects of that scale, when they finally are added up at the end, that 25 to 30 is more likely 45 to 50 billion. What would happen if we took those funds that the government says are there or are certainly dedicated to that and put that into creating the cutting-edge, high-speed electric rail system that connected, where you could go from Parry Sound through Barrie to Toronto in an hour, where you could go from Windsor to Toronto in an hour and a half, where you could go from Oshawa to the Pearson Airport in 20 minutes. That's the potential for that is there, the technology is there, but the will and incentive just doesn't seem to be there.
Yeah, we're gonna have, and I've had this conversation. I had this conversation at least 8-9 years ago, if not more, with local elected officials, provincial and federal, and talked about diverting some of the gas tax funds into that as well. If there was a will or desire to do that, it is absolutely possible, and you don't need to expropriate land. We've got the land along the 400 series highways already. You could have it right down the middle of it. You could build
right above
bridges and crossings and pedestrian crossings from your carpool lots into there. Absolutely, it is possible. It's a massive, massive price tag. And what would it accomplish? It would accomplish a ton. Right now, even with the express train going down from Barrie down to Union, by the time they spend, I don't know if it's $600 million or something like that on electrifying the system to go clean, that's great. It still doesn't improve the efficiency.
Doesn't make it any more timely.
No, you're still going on a milk run.
No. You need a second line there, so you've always got trains going one way that it can be constantly moving and always going the other way, rather than having to sidetrack as it works now, where one's coming north, one has to sit and wait for the other to pass.
There needs to be a holistic view as well. You need to move people, and you need to move people when they need to be moved.
Well,
if you're truly serving the people.
And
you have to move goods
to the next train. You need a train every 30 minutes.
You got to be moving goods as well, though, and you've got to be moving. And we are not a manufacturing society as much as we used to be, and as much as we possibly could be. But we definitely need to move goods, and that means we're importing and exporting, huge logistic freight loads up and down these highways, and our population is only going to continue to grow. We got to go to break, though, Mike. Great conversation.
Lots of great stuff to talk about here still.
Well, what do you want to talk about after the break?
Well, I'm thinking we can talk about just a little bit how that transportation ties in directly with housing and the demand for housing and the creation of housing, because there are links there.
I love it, but again, as we go into and continue into election season, I just hope that people are taking this question to the people who are knocking on doors and saying, how do I know I can hold you to your word that you are going to carry this through once this wave is over? But we got to go to break, so stick with us for more on Hitting Home with Mike and Arf. We will be right back on Rogers TV. Welcome back to Hitting Home with Mike and RFM. We're talking about the effect, well, certainly we're talking about election time, but we're also talking about the housing market, the effect of the last couple of years on the housing market, and now obviously the ripple effect, because every time you make a single change, there are going to be other things that get sort of impacted downstream or upstream, if you will. And one of those things certainly is transportation, Mike. And we were going into, you know, really talking about the reality of the Buck a Ride, you know, campaign talking point, if you will, slogan. Some might call it a gimmick, like the Buck of Beer. And the reality of implementing it, does it actually positively impact the entire electorate in Ontario? Does it only serve those in the core? How else? You know, and I'm not, you know, I have my opinion. Okay, fair enough, and as do you. There will be those who are going to argue our opinion, and I'm fine with that as well. What are some of the other ramifications, though, of that? If people, in fact, Mike, are moving as they have, and I don't think people move out of the GTA and sell their home and pack up all their belongings and move just to go back 6 months later. Most people won't do that. No. So if this is a longer term move for people because they believe that this change, at least for them, maybe not for all, is going to be lasting and or permanent, that they're going to make a major lifestyle change, now what does that do to the pressure of the supply in the housing market in any area outside of the GTA that they may set their sights on, and does it impact urban sprawl? My question more directly to you is this: for decades we've had the Places to Grow Act, or at least a decade, the Places to Grow Act in place, which said thou shalt build here. Along the 400 series highway. We will not have random pockets just showing up because we proved we couldn't sustain the infrastructure costs once they were built. But now that everything has changed, in that equation that I've talked about recently, everything is based on an equation. Now that people are moving, is that going to force change in terms of urban sprawl?
We'll need to find a new model. The Places to Grow model was pretty ambitious, and much of it was put together for the right reasons, and it was forward thinking. But there has to be kind of an in-between model looked at now, because I don't think at that time, well, maybe they did anticipate the growth that we would see, but it hadn't yet come. And
I don't think they anticipated at the same rate that we're
but now we're seeing it. But the one thing they probably didn't consider was the high cost of urban housing that would be happening in 2022.
And what about $2 a liter?
And $2 a liter gas and inflation. So those things are driving forces that are driving people out of the Greater Toronto area. You know, we've used the term drive till you qualify. People are moving out. They can't afford or choose not to pay the price of living in the GTA, or they have property there they know they can sell, move to a more affordable outlying region, and have a windfall that they can put in the bank and use for other things.
I want to be very clear, Mike.
Yep.
I want to be very clear. I want to be very clear. For those of us who think that housing prices are coming down, or for those of us who think that we can leave the GTA and find as much house for a fraction of the price. Again, that may or may not hold true for them. Certainly the first mover has the advantage, but once the masses catch on, and whatever that critical number or percentage is, leaves the GTA for greener pastures outside the GTA, yes, they may still buy for cheaper than what they had in the GTA, but for everybody not in the GTA, your house price went up. And will continue to grow up as long as that increased pressure is on supply.
People looking to get into the market within the community that they've lived in for some time have lost ground. They've saw the bar raised higher and higher, and many of them are having to look further and further away north, where there may be some affordability that they
Nobody's immune from it, and there are those who will say it's unfair. And well, is it unfair, or is it the exact same metrics being used just in a different, proportion, right? Because it is still
it's unfair that I
demand.
can't buy into Bitcoin today, or Microsoft, or
you can at 50%
or
off
Apple
right now, but
at the price I would like to buy it, that it was at 10, 15 years ago. But that's just the free market. It's up, it's down. You weigh your opportunities, when to get in, when to get out, and housing is no different. There is an unfairness to it, because I don't know I want to go as far as to say we all have a right to own our own homes, but we certainly have a right to have safe shelter within this country. We should. It should be built into the model anyways. And we have challenges with that, but that's another show too.
I think though, Mike, as long as the policymakers, the mortgage default insurers, and by the way, the relevance of the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation is being challenged right now because there are other participants in that market space now. But as long as they continue to stick to their legacy models and incentives and programs for home ownership, when everything has changed, literally everything has changed,
a recipe for
then
failure
they're not
down
serving
the road.
the people either. So we really do need to have a strong look at how we've always done things, because everything has changed. I know that's a generic statement. Feel free to look it up. Do the math, do the Googling. Everything has changed. And if as long as we're still applying the same practices, we're not serving each other.
Yeah, and I mean, we've got a long way to go, I think, bringing it back around to the transportation thing.
Oh yeah, we were talking about that.
Before that appeals to the masses. I mean, you and I, we drive our own cars. I love my space in there. I get a lot of work done in that car. I'm, hands-free on the phone constantly. It's a second office to me. And I do a lot of driving. You do a lot more driving than I do. You're all over the map all of the time. For you or I and many others, with the level of busyness we have and mobility, to make that transition, it's not going to happen anytime soon. Certainly the product being offered for public transit does not appeal or serve the needs of you or I or much of people. It's going to take some time for that transition to happen, but it's an investment that has to be made. And here's something to consider too. If there's a proposal brought forward in any municipality in Ontario, I know in Barrie area, I think the quota is there has to be 1.1 parking spaces per unit built. Imagine if we had a society at some point down the road where the option for public transit was good, it was fast, it met all the requirements that we needed, and we could reduce that necessity down to maybe one parking space for every 2 units, because more and more people are relying on public transit. You know how many more units could then be built on each parcel of land, and do you know how that would impact on the price of the product? That would bring housing costs down considerably for multi-unit residential. So to say transportation and real estate are not intertwined, there's one example where they're directly intertwined. So.
Absolutely, and again, Mike, as you know, I was in Manhattan recently, and I can certainly attest to the fact that public transit is well utilized in Manhattan.
For sure.
Again, a number of different lines, bus routes constantly, cabs, Ubers, Lyft,
parking
that kind
costs
of thing.
if you have a car are ridiculous.
You don't want to have a car there, and they have been forced to adapt to alternative forms of transportation. However, the e-bike is alive and well. Walking is alive and well. And so is delivery of goods and services to either corporations or to the individual homes.
They've got it down, yeah.
The Amazon guys aren't driving up in a white van or a UPS van or whatever it is to drop packages off. It's men and women who are pushing these carts that are loaded with the boxes and goods, and they're literally walking the neighborhoods and dropping the goods and services off.
It's such a compact, tight metropolis, though. Yeah. Things that can be done there efficiently just do not work in spread out regional communities like Barrie.
There has been an active effort to ensure that we don't just trace and like my humor or not, and it's not meant to be humor, but I picture it as sort of future chalk outlines of people on the road, because when you're forcing pedestrians and cyclists to ride in live lanes of traffic where we know statistically people are still texting and driving, you are putting people in harm's way.
We are.
When you look in Europe, when you look in London, when you look in New York, you've got truly separated bike lanes. They're painted green. There are bollards. They're plastic bollards that are up line the streets. They've actually got parking that is between the curb. There's the curb, and then there's an active transportation lane, and then there's parking, and there's essentially a barrier so that people can theoretically,
make a choice
safer in a safer manner.
And we've had test models of that in different communities. Here in Barrie, we have it. But again, it's not complete. It's not to the degree that it is in cities like New York, Manhattan, for sure.
Yeah, so again, back on topic though, I mean, closer to home, how is the housing model and market going to change? I do think that we have to revisit our Places to Grow Act. There will be a battle between those who are putting the environment as their priority.
Yeah, but there will be a cost to. I mean, we do have an impact, regardless, on the environment, our species of humans, and to pretend that we can have a zero footprint, zero impact society. Now, we can reduce. There's things we can do better, but we'll never reach a point where we're not impacting. So with every new community developed, there is going to be an impact.
The equation has to include the environmental priority, which is real, the cost, the availability of land, the cost of infrastructure, and the ability not just to introduce the infrastructure, but to sustain it, maintain it, because you're not getting development charges ever again once that single fee of development charges is collected.
It shifts over to the tax base.
It's now onto the tax base to keep things up to date, right? And then on top of that, we have to be willing to build up, and we have to be willing to consider building more density. So the question then becomes balancing those who are concerned about the environment with balancing those who don't want it in their backyard or who don't believe that this city currently resembles the place they moved to 20, 30, 40 years ago, right? And we've got, and some oddly will argue both the environment and not in my backyard. And I don't know where the argument really is. You've got to decide where your healthy balance is, and politicians have to decide that they're never going to please everybody. So we have to decide what that priority is, and I'm not against it. I am totally 100% in favor of ensuring that we do what we can to be good stewards of the environment.
For sure.
And we have to find ways to serve mankind, and people kind, whatever you want to call us these days.
And much of the future residential growth and construction is going to have to take place north of that Oak Ridges Moraine that exists. It's a protected belt that runs east to west all the way around north of the GTA. And the Places to Grow Act, a big part of why that was created was to protect that and make that, because there was encroachment of building into that region, and they had to step up and say, no, we're going to protect this. This is an important environmental component of the province here. So it caused a leapfrog over that, and then the residential growth continues. You hit Bradford, there's been lots and lots of growth, but once you're north of that Oak Ridges Moraine, all of the drainage goes into Lake Simcoe, and Lake Simcoe has had its issues and its challenges. So the more human activity and growth and people living in and around that region within that flood, or not the floodplain, but the drainage plain into Lake Simcoe, the more challenge, and that's a major concern that doesn't get ignored.
When we come back from the break, let's take all of that into consideration. And what I'd also like to discuss, though, Mike, is that a huge amount of any infrastructure that's being built, whether it's a new highway, or whether it's the rebuilding or the refurbishment of an overpass, or any other type of infrastructure that's being built, a huge portion of that funding comes from the provincial gas tax that is collected.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about that and EVs.
Let's talk about that on the other side of the break, because there is, in fact, a consequence to everything that's getting done. And I want to know, let's flesh this out. Let's discuss what's going to happen when we continue to push the initiatives that we're pushing, and how are we going to account for that. So stay with us on the other side of this break. Mike and I will pick that up again where we left off. Stay with us on Hitting Home with Mike and Arif. We'll be right back.
Welcome back to Hitting Home with Mike and Arif. And Arif and I have been having an interesting discussion here talking about the transportation system within Ontario, how it ties in with housing. And one of the things we hadn't touched on yet that we should, there has been a transition that's going to continue from fossil fuel powered vehicles to EVs, electric vehicles in Ontario. Certainly Tesla led the way with their product, but now every manufacturer seems to have its version of electric vehicles either on the market or soon to come to market here.
Well, there's certainly a mandate. I don't know if it's 2035 still or 2030,
Yeah.
but there is a mandate of a certain percentage of vehicles being
Yeah.
manufactured. Yeah,
And
absolutely.
and it's interesting. It's not without controversy or conflict as far as I'm concerned. I love the idea of electric vehicles. I like the nice quiet ride, the dependability, the power, the speed, everything else that goes with it, and the affordability certainly of fueling that vehicle versus fossil fuel.
For now.
But that's for now, for sure. Because something to consider is when we put our gasoline into the car and fill that engine up, there is a fuel tax that is taken off of that fuel. A portion of that fuel tax goes directly to fund the maintenance of our roads within the province and to an extent our public transportation systems throughout the province. That's multi-millions, if not billions of dollars that is collected every year that the government relies on coming in. Now, if we're transitioning over to electric vehicles, we're no longer paying that gas tax to that extent. Which makes me wonder that all those free electrical charging stations that popped up everywhere, they're free for now, but I think they've also been there as an incentive to get people to transition over to electric vehicles. But at some point, there's going to be a fee for use. And that fee will probably be the equivalent of whatever you've been paying per 100 kilometers to drive your gas-powered vehicle. I can imagine the cost.
Yeah, so Mike, that whole equation keeps coming back in my mind. All I'm seeing is images of some TV show where some guy's writing an equation out on the blackboard and you got to figure it out.
Yeah.
You're right, Mike. I mean, I think at this point, if memory serves me correctly, it's just shy of 15 cents per liter goes into
that fund, and it's 3 to 5
fund.
cents of that goes to what I said, transit and roads.
Absolutely.
Mainly.
So when you take the federal portion, when you take the provincial portion, when you add a carbon tax in there, when you add some HST in there, you're looking at well over 50 cents a liter, or let's call it over 50 cents a liter per liter that is getting collected in tax revenue. You're correct. As the shift continues to go towards green energy or electric vehicles, less liters of fuel are being pumped in, and therefore less dollars are being collected. Whether you have an electric vehicle on the road or whether you have a combustion engine on the road, you have wear and tear on the infrastructure. So roads need to be repaved,
well, that's the thing.
replaced, potholes need to be filled, fences need to be rebuilt after they're crashed into.
The congestion problem doesn't change because it's an electric vehicle.
So you can be sure that that's going to go over, and there's going to be a tax on or metered on consumption to recharge the battery on an electric vehicle.
And I think, sorry, I'm just going to jump in. I think another way that the government is going to replace that revenue loss will probably toll roads. We'll see more and more of our highways we're paying for use.
If you look at some municipalities around the world, they are using toll roads. Certainly in London, England, they have a toll, or you were only allowed to drive, depending on the first letter of your license plate, you're only allowed on certain days of the week to drive into the core of the city. But something that I think also needs to be taken into consideration is we already are challenged by brownouts in the summertime, in July and August. We are already challenged by those. We're giving away our electricity to our neighbors to the south. We're paying 300% to get it back when we need it, when we are in a short supply. We've got an outdated grid. We have had a war on nuclear. You name it. I mean, and again, I'm not going to give an opinion on this, although I might have one. However, as we have more people adopt the electric vehicle,
there's more demand
on the grid
on that system.
Absolutely.
And I think the concept of electrical vehicles has the potential to be environmentally positive for society. I just don't think we're there yet. It's good that you've got zero emissions at the vehicle itself versus the car beside it that's got burning fuel, but there are emissions being created in order for that electric car to run. But they're being created hundreds of miles away at a power station, and that power could be generated through fossil fuel powered plant that's being powering and creating the electricity.
The ability to mine for the components that go into the battery and the recycling of that as well. But Mike, as long as we're clean here, who cares what they're doing over there?
Well, that's the attitude.
Exactly.
That's the attitude. And, it's out of sight, out of mind. But the loss, like the equivalent of 100 kilometers of travel on electric, the amount of loss power from when it's generated to when it finally reaches the point where you fill your vehicle. Like, again, it's an old antiquated system. There's a lot of power that's just kind of evaporated between there and there.
Well, so
it's not efficient
when
in
people
that
were
regard.
first adopting the Prius, I believe it was the Prius was the first one that was, I think, a hybrid at that point.
The first mass-produced one, yeah, for sure.
And basically, when you ran the numbers, the people who do the math way better than I do said it takes you 8 years to break even on the upcharge to get the hybrid version of it. Forget the base vehicle. The upcharge of that is an 8-year recovery period. I don't know many people are going to keep it 8 years, and are the batteries themselves going to last 8 years?
I think we've gotten better. Two things have happened.
Absolutely.
Is costs have come down, and the amount of distance we can travel on one charge of a vehicle has increased dramatically.
At $2 a liter, absolutely, it's the scales are tipped.
But you touched on it. There's graphite, there's lithium, there's silicon, there's all these precious metals. What are they called? Rare earth metals and components that go into the production of a battery. They're being mined in Africa and different parts of the world. The environmental impact there is ridiculously high.
And the social impact, by the way.
And as well as the stopgap measures to protect the environment in those regions is far less than our own Alberta production of oil. So, and I'm not saying I'm pro-gas, pro-fuel. I'm just looking at it.
Challenges with the type of labor that, I mean, you can do your own research.
I really want to see it work.
Careful on which source you're researching, and whether you're just looking at the first article that is anti-green energy or anti-battery.
I want to see it work.
Do your homework.
And the potential is there for it to work, but we can't pretend that there aren't, that EV cars are all good and there's no downside, no environmental impact. The impact is just shifted to other countries, with lower standards for.
So what does that have to do with housing, Mike?
Well, it doesn't have a lot directly to do with housing. We will shift to that electrified vehicles. All of us will probably be driving them, I would think, at some point, because the pressure is there. And what it has to do with housing is, so long as a certain element of those vehicles are being produced locally, and all the technology that goes into those vehicles is being produced locally, that's good for our economy. And that alone tells me, bring it on. Let's keep producing those electric vehicles.
But I do think it has something to do with housing as well, Mike, as you touched on the fact that, if we decide to accept the concept that our city as we know it is going to continue to evolve, and by evolve, we're going to embrace some wonderful new things that come out of the opportunity of evolving and having a more densely populated neighborhood and community, because ours is a city that is certainly a city by all standards, and it certainly has a community feel for now. And there are those who are concerned about the fact that as we continue to grow, as our population almost doubles maybe in the next 10 years, will we lose that sense of community, or will we be able to maintain and retain that sense of community? I think the answer to that is in how we choose to build our community.
Yeah.
If we choose to build neighborhoods that are walkable and neighborhoods that have active transportation corridors in them, intentionally built roadways, not the way we built them 5 years ago or 10 years ago or 20 years ago, but roads that are built for pedestrianization and cycling, and that we have cafes that, not just taking up a live lane of traffic, but actually build the arteries and the hubs within neighborhood communities to be purpose-built to incorporate patios and playgrounds and walkable areas and art installations and live music and all these things. Because if we are going to continue to commute, at least 50% of the population or 40% of the population is going to continue to commute outside of town, then there's no point in building that stuff in town. Yeah. But if we are going to,
we need to transition.
If we are going to do more of working remotely or working from home or have different types of occupations that allow us to work within our
that
own
whole model
neighborhood,
of how we work needs to be
build for the people.
Be built better and work in home closer. There's so many things that can be done. The incentive, the will to do it, it seems higher with an election looming closer because it gets talked about then, but once the election goes, how much of that stuff then gets pushed to the side and the day-to-day issues and challenges?
I would love to have a real vibrant conversation with those who are, one, vying to hold an elected seat, and not only them, because again, anybody who's listening who might be running for office should recognize that you're likely not being voted in because you're the expert in any one of these fields, but you're the expert in communicating with your public and being the liaison between those who are paid experts to do the homework and bring reports and studies and recommendations forward, and then it is your job to either give it the nod or not. I would love to have a healthy, robust conversation with those who have been maybe in that position of expertise for 5, 10, 20, 30 years, some of them. Are they genuinely paying attention to the shift that has come forward over the last couple of years about the changing face and the pace at which we are changing the face of our community?
Less likely than those newer to the table, I would think. And younger.
So I would like to see that happen. Personally, if I had my say, if someone was knocking on my door, I would want to know how receptive they are to changing and new ideas and the perfect formula that worked before. Now that everything has changed, is it still a perfect formula? My suggestion's probably not. So it doesn't mean trash the old one. It means it was great, appreciate it for what it was when it was. What's the new formula going forward?
And it shouldn't be, it doesn't have to be roads versus public transit, however that may look. Because we do need a balance of both. Because aside from you and I and everyone else driving to and from wherever we need to go, be it for work or our personal needs, we rely heavily on moving goods by our roadways in Ontario. And so those roads need to be maintained to keep those goods moving in the province. So
when we come back from the break, Mike, let's talk drones. But
drones?
When we come back from the break, maybe let's see if we can put a bow on this. It will be a crowded sky, and I say that tongue in cheek, although I do see it happening to some degree. So, but we got to go to break. But when we come back, we'll see if we can make some sense of this conversation and maybe put some projections out there or some foreshadowing out there on what we may see in the call it the 4-year term ahead as we go forward. But stay with us for more Hitting Home with Mike and Arf. We'll be right back on Rogers TV right after this break. Welcome back to Hitting Home with Mike and Arf on Rogers TV. And Mike, we've had a great show talking about a number of things that are housing related. And I guess, Mike, if I could sum it up into one thing, it is we as a people, as an electorate, as a community, have to in some way, shape, or form come to terms with embracing the concept of change. The way we've always done things is not going to work tomorrow. And you can go back as far as you want in history, that's always been the case, and it's never fun. However, Mike, as we go, we're just have dealt with the provincial election. We're going to be into the municipal election. We're going to have lots of people continuing to knock on our doors and selling their story, if you will, and why they should represent us. If you had an opportunity, Mike, to sit down with either the Premier or your local member of provincial parliament or your local ward councillor or the mayor, et cetera, What would you ask them, or what would you say to them?
First, I would just say, with that leadership, it's not just about answering the wants of the people. And I think of that quote from Henry Ford, said, had I listened to the people, we would have faster horses right now. So, sometimes you've got to step ahead and anticipate what the people need and have the determination and will to go forward with, even if it may be unpopular in the moment. And I think we need that kind of bold leadership with regards to transportation. And one of the things I would ask for sure is, well, aside from where's my jetpack that we all thought we'd have at this point in time, at least we should have high-speed electric rail transportation in Ontario, because they have it through the Asian countries, they have it through Europe. It works amazingly. People of all walks of life and all income levels use that transportation system. It's not just for those who can't afford a car. It works. If I could go from Barrie to Union Station in 30 minutes, I'd be taking that every day, and so would many more people. And same going east and west. And that corridor between here and Toronto would be vibrant and would be built up all the way down. And electric rail is something, it's not going to be cheap, but then again, as we've seen, building the 413 roadway east and west north of Toronto is not a cheap opportunity either, and it's a very unpopular one. So,
is it worth the cost? And that's a question that I think needs to be
investing in our future.
Yeah, but I think that's a question that we, the electorate, need to have a conversation with ourselves, so to speak, an internal dialogue that says, yes, it's going to cost money.
It's not economically pain-free.
What is the return on the investment of that? I keep looking at it from the perspective of, where is my productivity? I am not productive sitting in gridlock for an hour and a half, 2 hours, 3 hours, whatever amount of time that may be. I'm not productive sitting in traffic for 15 minutes.
Yeah.
So if I'm
listening to Bohemian Rhapsody for the 4th time,
exactly. But if I'm on public transit, or if I'm in my own mode of transportation, but I can get from A to B faster, and I have had to pay for that convenience, but is it really just convenience, or can I look at it as an example of it being an investment that allows me to get from A to B faster so that I can be productive with my time saving? And that's something that I think
it's been proven.
Not a lot of us, or not enough of us, actually figures, what is my time worth? And I'm not suggesting that people don't think about it. I'm saying, in this scenario, with regard to this investment or this cost or this challenge that we're facing, is the price that we pay. Can we make sure that I'm willing to pay that price as long as I personally follow through on being productive with my time savings? Do I value my time?
Yeah. And it will balance out in that regard. And I don't think people are paying to use the 404 just because it's a cool roadway. Right. I think the time savings, people have factored the equation, and for them, my time is worth this, and if I'm saving that much time by using that roadway versus 401 or Highway 7, then yes, it's worth the investment. And it's not free, but if we think our roadways are free today, every time we go to the pump, as we've said, there's that fuel tax, and you look, we're over $2 a liter today for gas. A good chunk of that, or a significant
25% of that is
going for that. So we're paying one way or the other.
So if I was to sit with any of the above politicians, the question really would come down to, am I going to follow through? Am I willing to, first of all, am I willing to be unpopular? Not for the sake of being unpopular, but for the sake of knowing that I'm doing what is right. Am I willing to follow through on my promise or on my commitment? Can I rally? Am I going to waste time just voting against the other side because I have to vote against the other side, or am I going to recognize a good idea when I see one? And am I truly committed to doing what is right and serving the public? And that's a question that, whether you're in municipal politics or whether you're in provincial politics, there is a great fear of job preservation for some. I mean, you can look at it with regard to the coalition in Ottawa right now, because one or both of those parties has given up something in order to remain in office, just for the sake of making sure that the other guy doesn't get in. But am I committed? Can I commit to following through on doing what I know is right, true, and fair?
And looking at the promises being made, the different platforms of the various parties in the provincial election, They all seem to be, I mean, they all have their varying ideas on how to reach the goal, but the goal seems to be united between all of them. And that is certainly housing affordability, housing availability, and the various means that they believe we can get ourselves there to where we need to be, and certainly transportation measures that need to be done.
It's been
that we've talked about here today.
It's been
Will
a
they
lot,
follow through is the big thing.
It's been a lot longer than 4 years that housing affordability and availability has been a challenge.
It's been 2 generations that it's fallen out of whack.
And yet I'm not sure I've seen any of the candidates actually making this the single priority. They say they're making it, and I'm looking for the follow-through.
Do I have time to throw in one more consideration there? And that just thinking we can and should build 1 million more homes within 10 years is all well and good, but we do not have the manpower to do that. That's another thing we got to focus on, is getting the trades, getting the people, the skills needed to get us to those goals that we need to achieve.
So Mike, we started the show, yes, we've talked about transportation, and we've talked about housing, and we've talked about the impacts of doing or not doing the right thing and how they're intertwined. Let's finish the show with a little bit about politics as well, because that is politics. We've talked about politics. Let's talk about politics now. And we do have that segment that we want to talk about right now,
Almost forgot.
Is let's make sure that we have an opportunity to embrace and shine a spotlight on people doing something good within our community. And we have carved out time in our show to shine a spotlight on those who are worthy and deserving of some recognition in our community. We call that segment, Mike, we call it the Good Citizen Award. And this week's Good Citizen Award goes to each and every one of you who has taken the time to get out and get to the advanced polls, Mike, and get out and committed to voting on Election Day. Because, Mike, as we talked about throughout the entire show, we started with politics, we're ending with politics. We talk about the necessary change and the fact that we're going to have to embrace it, but none of that happens without having good and healthy engagement with our elected representatives, make sure that they serve us the way that we need and demand to be served. Mike, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I think, getting them in there, the people we want, certainly demands we go, and it doesn't take a lot of effort to go and vote. And I think in some countries they would, they just love the opportunity to be able to just go and vote. And we take it for granted here, sadly, but it is probably one of the most important and significant things we as a free country are allowed to do and should do. And I think as well as voting, though, it's that follow-up afterwards, holding our people to the fire and making them sure that they follow through on those things. We need to be more closely engaged on the whole with our elected officials.
Absolutely, and so this is really a thanks to each and every one of you, our neighbors. We may not agree with everything. We may, in fact, disagree on lots of stuff. But if you took the time to get out and vote, that is that is exactly what we're applauding each and every one of you for. So we thank you very much. Thanks for joining us on Hitting Home with Mike and Arf, and we will see you again.